Welcome to Almost Alone. Tonight's episode is different. These aren't ghost stories. They're not about things that go bump in the night or supernatural forces beyond our understanding. They're about people, real people, using belief systems, twisted, extreme, dangerous belief systems, as cover for the worst things humans can do to each other. Both stories tonight involve stumbling into something that shouldn't exist in the modern world, something hidden in remote places where no one goes looking, where isolation becomes a weapon and witnesses become problems. The first person saw exactly what was happening. The second person saw enough to never stop wondering. One escaped because they acted fast. The other escaped because they stayed silent. Before we begin, if you're new here, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you. These stories are told calmly, but they're not easy. They stay with you. If this resonates, consider subscribing. It helps others find these stories. Let's begin. I'm 31 now. What I'm about to tell you happened when I was 24. I've talked to therapists about it. I've given statements to police. I've tried to rationalize it, minimize it, convince myself it wasn't as bad as I remember. But it was. It was exactly as bad as I remember. I was working as a freelance photographer back then, trying to build a portfolio that would get me hired by outdoor magazines or travel companies. I'd been documenting trails in the Pacific Northwest, beautiful landscapes, sunrise shots from mountain peaks, that kind of thing. In early November, I drove out to a trailhead I'd found online. It wasn't popular, maybe a dozen reviews total, most of them from years earlier. The photos looked incredible: dense forest, a waterfall about 3 miles in, and supposedly an old growth grove that hadn't been logged. I started hiking around 7 in the morning. The trail was overgrown in places, but still followable. I passed one other hiker on the way up, an older man with a dog. We exchanged nods and kept moving. By 9:30, I'd reached the waterfall. I took my shots, rested for a bit, then kept going. According to the map, the old growth grove was another 2 miles past the falls, off the main trail. That's where things went wrong. The path to the grove wasn't marked well. I found what I thought was the turnoff, a narrow dirt path heading east through thick brush, and followed it. After about 20 minutes, I realized I hadn't seen a trail marker in a while. I stopped and checked my phone. No service, which I'd expected. I had a downloaded map, but the GPS was spotty under the tree cover. I decided to backtrack. That's when I heard the voices, faint at first. Multiple people, somewhere ahead of me through the trees. I couldn't make out words, just the low murmur of conversation. I felt relieved. Other hikers meant I was probably still near the trail. Maybe they could point me in the right direction. I walked toward the sound. The trees opened into a clearing. It wasn't large, maybe 40 feet across. The ground was bare dirt, no grass, like it had been cleared deliberately. At the center was a circle of stones, blackened from fire. And around the circle were people, 11 of them. I counted later when I gave my statement. They were all wearing dark clothing, mostly black, some with hoods. A few had their faces partially covered with scarves or bandanas. They weren't hiking. They were standing in a loose formation, facing inward toward the stone circle. And in the center, tied to a wooden post that had been driven into the ground, was a woman. She was young, maybe early 20s. Her hands were bound behind the post. Her mouth was gagged with cloth. Her eyes were wide, darting between the people surrounding her. She was crying. I froze. For a moment, maybe 3 seconds, maybe less, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. People don't do this. Not in real life. Not in a forest 2 hours from Seattle. One of the figures near the woman was holding something. At first I thought it was a stick. Then I saw the blade catch the light filtering through the trees. A knife. Long, curved, ornate handle. My hand instinctively went to my camera. I don't know why I did it. Training kicked in before fear could. The same reflex that makes you document what you see, even when what you're seeing doesn't make sense. I raised it and took one photo. The shutter sound cut through the silence. One of them turned, then another, then all of them, like a wave moving through the group. Within seconds, every single person in that clearing was looking directly at me. No one moved, no one spoke. We just stood there, me at the edge of the trees, them in the clearing, the woman bound in the center. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then I saw her eyes. The woman tied to the post was staring directly at me. Not pleading, not crying anymore, just staring. And I swear, I will never be sure about this, but I swear. She shook her head, just once. A tiny, deliberate movement, warning me. One of the figures, a man taller than the rest, took a step toward me. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just turned and crashed back through the brush, the way I'd come, branches whipping across my face and arms. Behind me, I heard shouting. Movement. Multiple people running. I didn't look back. My only advantage was that I just walked this path. I could see where branches were broken, where the ground was disturbed. I followed my own trail in reverse, stumbling over roots, gasping for air. They were fast. I could hear them behind me, boots pounding on dirt, breaking through undergrowth. But I had a head start. After maybe 5 minutes of running, I heard something ahead of me. Voices. Different voices. I burst out onto the main trail. There were people there, a couple with backpacks, maybe in their 50s, standing near a trail marker looking at a map. They looked up, startled, as I came crashing out of the woods. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit stopped. Immediately, like someone had flipped a switch. I turned and looked back at the tree line, gasping for air. Nothing. No one emerging. Just silence and the rustling of leaves. They'd stopped the moment they heard other voices. The moment there were witnesses. The couple asked if I was okay. I must have looked insane, scratched, bleeding from the branches, breathing like I'd run a marathon. I told them someone was following me. They asked who. I couldn't explain. I just said we needed to leave. Now. We hiked down together. They didn't ask many questions. I think they could tell something was seriously wrong. When we reached the parking lot, I got in my car and drove until I had cell service. Then I called 911. I pulled over on the side of the highway and told the dispatcher everything. A woman tied up in a clearing, people in dark clothes, a knife, someone chasing me. They told me to drive to the nearest town and wait. Officers would meet me there. I sat in a diner parking lot for 40 minutes before a sheriff's deputy and a detective arrived. I told them the whole story again, showed them the photo on my camera. It was blurry. I'd been shaking when I took it, but you could see them, the figures in dark clothes. The woman tied to the post, the knife in someone's hand. The detective stared at that photo for a long time. They asked me to take them back to the trailhead. I did. By the time we got there, it was early afternoon. We hiked up with 4 officers. I led them to where I'd left the main trail, but I couldn't find the exact spot where I'd heard the voices. Everything looked different. We searched for over an hour. Finally, one of the officers called out. He'd found it. The clearing was there. The stone circle was there. The post was there, freshly driven into the ground, splinters still pale where the bark had been stripped off. But no people, no woman, no evidence of what I'd interrupted except disturbed dirt and footprints. Lots of footprints. The detective crouched down near the fire pit. He pointed at the ground, dark staining in the dirt, multiple spots. They took samples. They also found something else near the tree line. A canvas bag, half hidden under leaves. Inside were zip ties, duct tape, and a coil of rope. and scratched into several trees surrounding the clearing were symbols, carved deep into the bark, fresh sap still visible. Not random marks, deliberate patterns. The detective took photos of everything. He pointed at the footprints. There were dozens of them, overlapping and crisscrossing, impossible to isolate or match to individuals. He said it had rained 2 nights before, which meant any evidence from prior uses of the clearing was likely washed away. And whatever happened this morning left too much contamination, too many people moving around to pull anything clean. He asked me to describe the woman again. I did. Dark hair, pale skin, early 20s, wearing jeans and a gray sweatshirt. He wrote it all down and said they'd be in touch. 2 days later, they called me back to the station. They showed me a photo. Her name was Emily Graves. She was 23. She'd been reported missing by her roommate 6 days earlier. Last seen leaving a coffee shop in Olympia. The photo matched. Same face, same dark hair. I asked if they'd found her. Not yet, the detective said, but they were looking. 3 weeks passed. I checked the news every day, nothing. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang. It was the detective. They'd found her. She was alive. A driver had spotted her walking along Highway 101, about 40 miles north of where I'd been hiking, barefoot, dehydrated, covered in scratches and bruises. She'd been wandering along the shoulder for hours. She was in the hospital now, he said. Stable. Not talking much. I asked if I could see her. He said no. But he wanted to show her my photo, to confirm I was the hiker who'd called it in. When he did, she started crying and nodded. A week later, the detective called me again. He said Emily had said something, just one sentence, and then she'd stopped talking again. He stopped them. I still don't know what she meant by that. I didn't stop anything. I just interrupted at the right moment. Or maybe she was so traumatized that the timeline didn't make sense to her anymore. I don't know. But there was something else he wanted to tell me. When they examined her at the hospital, they found marks, not from restraints or injuries, symbols, carved into her skin with something sharp, shallow cuts, deliberate patterns, on her shoulder blades, her lower back, her ankles, the same symbols they'd found on the trees in the clearing. He asked if I'd noticed anyone's face in the clearing, if any of them had been uncovered. I pulled up the photo on my camera and zoomed in. Most of them were covered, hoods, scarves, shadows. But one figure standing near the back had turned at the exact moment I took the shot. The scarf had slipped. I could see part of his face. I sent the enhanced image to the detective. They never made any arrests. The people in that clearing vanished. No DNA matches, no identifiable evidence, no way to track them. The detective told me, off the record, that they'd found evidence the clearing had been used before, not just once, multiple times over several years. Remnants of burnt fabric buried in the dirt, animal bones arranged in patterns, old carvings on trees that had started to heal over. He said they believed it was a group that moved frequently, using remote locations across multiple states for whatever they were doing. He said I was lucky, that if I'd stayed even a few seconds longer, or if I'd tried to help her directly instead of running, I wouldn't have made it out. And then he said something I think about constantly. He said Emily was found 40 miles north, but her car had been located days earlier during the initial missing person investigation in a grocery store parking lot 60 miles south of the trailhead, meaning they'd moved her. After I interrupted them, they packed up and moved her to a different location. They didn't stop. They just relocated. And according to what Emily eventually told a trauma counselor weeks later, information the detective shared with me months after, she escaped when they stopped at a gas station during the transport. One of them went inside to pay. The other was distracted with his phone. She slipped her restraints and ran into the woods behind the station. If that driver hadn't seen her on the highway, If she hadn't gotten those few seconds alone, no one would have ever found her. I think about that woman tied to that post, watching a stranger stumble into the clearing. I think about her shaking her head, warning me to run. I think about what those symbols carved into her skin meant. If they were marking her, claiming her, preparing her for something. And I think about the 11 people in that clearing, all turning to look at me like a wave moving through water, like they were waiting, like they'd done this before, like they knew exactly what to do when someone saw too much. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't go to remote trails. And I don't take shortcuts off marked paths. Because I know now what hides in places people don't go. And I know what happens when someone interrupts them. The photo is still on my camera. I've never deleted it. Sometimes I zoom in on the faces I can see. The one with the slipped scarf, the others partially visible in shadow. And I wonder if they know who I am. If they saw me as clearly as I saw them. If they remember the person who got away. I'm 36 now. This happened when I was 28, during what was supposed to be a relaxing weekend with friends. 4 of us, me, my girlfriend at the time, and another couple, rented a cabin in the Ozarks for a long weekend in early October. The cabin was remote, down a gravel road surrounded by dense forest, no neighbors for miles. Exactly what we wanted, a chance to disconnect, sit around a fire, drink beer, and do nothing. The first 2 days were perfect. We hiked a little, played cards, cooked over an open flame, the kind of trip where you come back feeling recharged. On the 3rd day, I went for a walk alone. Not far, just a mile or so into the woods behind the cabin. There was an old logging road back there, mostly overgrown, that I'd noticed the day before. I wanted to see where it went, maybe get some photos. I followed the road for about 20 minutes. It curved through the trees, rutted and uneven, definitely not used in years. At one point it forked, and I took the left path heading uphill. That's when I smelled it. Smoke. Faint but distinct. Not fresh. Old smoke. Kind that lingers in fabric and wood after a fire's been out for hours. I kept walking, slower now. I wasn't worried, just curious. Plenty of people camp in these woods. Probably just someone's old fire pit. The path widened into a clearing. It was small, maybe 20 feet across, ringed by thick pines. The ground was trampled flat, like a lot of people had been standing there. In the center was a fire pit. Not a casual camping setup. This was deliberate. A large circle of stones, scorched black, filled with ash and what looked like partially burned wood. Around the fire pit were symbols. I'm not talking about graffiti or random marks. These were deliberate. Drawn in the dirt with something sharp. Maybe a stick, maybe a tool. Geometric patterns, circles, lines intersecting at angles. Some of them looked like letters, but not from any alphabet I recognized. I stood there staring at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I noticed the trees. On several of the pines surrounding the clearing, there were marks carved into the bark, deep cuts, fresh enough that sap was still seeping from the wounds. The wood underneath was pale and raw. More symbols, more patterns. One of them looked like an eye. Not abstract, an actual eye, with a pupil in the center, watching outward from the trunk. I pulled out my phone to take pictures. No service, but the camera still worked. I photographed the symbols in the dirt, the carvings on the trees, the fire pit. That's when I saw the cloth. It was tied to a low branch on the far side of the clearing. Dark fabric, black or deep red, hard to tell in the filtered light. It hung limp, moving slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. I walked closer. It wasn't a flag. It was a piece of clothing, a shirt, torn and stained. Beneath it, on the ground, was something else. A pile of items, small things, arranged in a deliberate circle. I crouched down to look. Candles, half melted, covered in dirt. A small glass jar filled with something dark. Twine wound into intricate knots. Feathers tied together with thread. And at the center, a small bundle of bones. They were too small to be human. Bird bones, maybe. Or rabbit. That's what I told myself. But the arrangement was wrong. Everything was placed deliberately. Candles at 4 points around the circle, perfectly spaced. The jar at the exact center. The bones laid out in a line pointing toward the fire pit. This wasn't random. Someone had built this. Carefully. I took more photos. Then I noticed the smell again. Not smoke anymore. Something else underneath it. Something metallic and organic. Distinct enough that I couldn't ignore it. I turned and looked at the fire pit again. In the ash, partially buried, was something I hadn't seen before. A piece of fabric, burned at the edges, still mostly intact. It was soaked in something that had dried into the fibers. Dark brown, almost black in places. I didn't want to know what it was. I didn't want to look closer, but I did. I crouched near the edge of the fire pit, careful not to touch anything, and looked. The fabric was clothing, part of a sleeve maybe, or a pant leg. The staining was concentrated in certain areas, heavy, saturated, like something had been poured or had pooled there. My chest tightened. I stood up fast and backed away from the fire pit, my eyes scanning the rest of the clearing. On the far side, near the tree line, the dirt looked disturbed. Not like footprints, like something had been dragged or buried. The ground was mounded slightly, uneven, with loose soil piled at one end. I didn't go over there. I didn't investigate. I just turned and walked back the way I'd come, fast, not running, not panicking, just leaving. But I kept looking over my shoulder. The trees felt different now, thicker, closer, like they were watching, like something was watching. When I got back to the cabin, I told my friends what I'd seen. They thought I was overreacting. One of them laughed and said it was probably just some weird campsite, maybe teenagers messing around, or someone doing a Halloween prank. I wanted to believe that, but I kept thinking about the sap still dripping from the tree carvings, the candles deliberately placed, the blood-stained fabric in the fire pit, the disturbed dirt near the tree line. That night I barely slept. Something scraped against the cabin wall, just once, deliberate, like someone running their hand along the siding to test which boards were loose. Then nothing, just silence and the sound of my own breathing. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that eye carved into the tree, staring at me. The next morning we packed up and left a day early. I didn't tell them the real reason. I just said I wasn't feeling well. On the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror. I don't know what I expected to see. Nothing. Just empty road and forest. A week later, I tried to report it. I called the local sheriff's office and described what I'd found. The clearing, the symbols, the items, the fabric in the fire pit, the disturbed dirt. The woman who answered took my information and said someone would look into it. She sounded bored, like she was filling out a form she'd filled out 100 times before. I asked if I should send photos. She said that would be helpful and gave me an email address. I sent them that afternoon. 17 images total. Clear shots of everything I'd seen. I waited 2 weeks. Nothing. I called back. Different person answered. I explained I'd sent photos and filed a report about a possible crime scene. He put me on hold. When he came back, he said he couldn't find any record of my email. I told him I'd resend it immediately and asked for a direct email address. He gave me the same one I'd used before. I sent the photos again right after we hung up. I never heard anything back. He asked for the location. I described it as best I could. The logging road, the fork, how far I'd walked. My phone didn't have signal out there, so the photos weren't geotagged with coordinates. I tried to give landmarks, but everything in those woods looks the same. He said they'd send someone out to check. I asked when. He said he wasn't sure. They were short-staffed, and unless there was immediate danger or confirmed evidence of a crime, these things took time. I called one more time, 3 weeks after that. Asked if anyone had followed up. The person on the phone sounded annoyed. They said there was no update and that if something was found, someone would contact me. No one ever did. I gave up. 3 months later, I was scrolling through a news site and saw a headline. Human remains found in Ozark National Forest. Investigation underway. I clicked on it. Hikers had discovered remains in a remote area of the forest, about 30 miles from where I'd been staying. The article was vague, just said the remains were under investigation and that foul play was suspected. No names, no details, no specific location beyond Ozark National Forest. There were no follow-up articles that I could find. I don't know if what I found in that clearing was connected to those remains. 30 miles is close enough to be the same region, far enough to be unrelated. I don't know if the bones I saw were animal or something else. I don't know what the fabric in the fire pit was soaked in, or what was buried beneath that disturbed dirt. But I know it wasn't nothing. And I know the sheriff's office didn't prioritize it. Maybe they get calls like that all the time. People finding weird stuff in the woods, getting spooked, jumping to conclusions. Maybe to them it was just another paranoid tourist wasting their time. But I reported it. Multiple times. With photos. With a specific location. And it went nowhere. A few months after that, I was going through the photos on my phone. Deleting old images, clearing space. When I stopped on the pictures from the clearing. I'd looked at them dozens of times since that trip, analyzing details, trying to see something I'd missed. This time, I zoomed in on one of the wide shots I'd taken, the full clearing from the edge of the tree line. I'd been focused on the foreground when I looked at this photo before. The symbols, the fire pit, the items on the ground. But this time I panned to the background. In the tree line on the far side of the clearing, partially obscured by branches and shadow, there was something. A shape. Dark. Tall. I zoomed in further. The resolution wasn't great. It was too far away. The lighting was dim under the trees, but the proportions were wrong for a trunk or a stump. It looked like a person, standing just inside the tree line, facing toward where I'd been standing. I don't know how I missed it before. I'd been so focused on documenting what was in front of me that I never looked at the edges of the frame. But when I zoom in on that shape now, on the stance, the way it's positioned, I can't convince myself it's a tree or a shadow. It's a person. And they were there the whole time, watching me take photos, watching me crouch by the fire pit, watching me leave. I still have the photos, all of them. Sometimes I open them and stare at that figure in the background, trying to see details that aren't there, trying to convince myself I'm wrong, but I'm not. Someone was there, and when I walked back to the cabin that day, when I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like the trees were watching, I wasn't imagining it. I was right. That's the end of tonight's episode. 2 people, 2 clearings. One saw exactly what was happening. One saw enough to never stop wondering. Both of them walked into something hidden, something that operates in the spaces between towns, beyond cell service, where witnesses are rare and evidence disappears. If you've experienced something like this, if you've seen something you weren't supposed to see, you can share your story through the link in the description. And if tonight's episode resonated with you, consider subscribing. It helps others find these stories. Thank you for listening. Stay aware, stay cautious, and stay almost alone.